What's up, YouTube? I mentioned in the last video that I'd done a couple of Dimir leagues, and I sadly forgot to do the voiceover for the second one, so here we are. Long story short, we're going to have several videos coming out in the next week or so where I went back through and played a league with like Rakdos, a league with Golgari trying out the new invasion tech, a league with Jun trying out invasion, and a couple others, just like revisiting some old stuff out of curiosity, seeing if anything kind of stuck. So those videos will be coming out uh probably within the next week and a half. I've done the voiceovers for most of them already. I just got to spend a little time making some awesome thumbnails for them. And then we'll be able to get them uploaded. But today, just going over this second Dimir League. Um, Nothing too crazy. Like when I say I've been pretty happy with this list, I've been pretty happy with the list. Like the only flex spots I've really been messing around with have been the one of Opt or the fourth Murktide being maybe like a Brazen Borrower, a third Archmage's Charm, like things that aren't that big of a percentage difference, but just trying to get like a little more, a little less feel for what I'm looking for. I find that whenever I go up to like the four Murktide, I see multiples more often than I would like to. But when I cut down to three, they're just non existent. So at the end of the day, I feel I would more likely be okay with seeing multiples than not seeing them at all, since like the second one, you can always just kind of help grow the first one, or the second one even is just like a 4/4 or a 5/5 flyer for two is like still very reasonable. So the first one like hits all your spells, second one hits your fetch lands and wraiths, and maybe the first Murktide that died, whatever the case may be. Sideboard I've been pretty happy with. A lot of the league metas right now are very, very up in the air. So having some general answers like spreading seeds for anything land related, dress down for any overarching saga deck, Path of Peril for some of these random aggro decks, um, Chalice of the Void for any type of Cascade deck. It's been kind of okay to have just these wide catching answers out of the sideboard. But if you're expecting a specific meta, like a local meta or a PBTQ that you're kind of preparing for, whatever the case may be, then you can absolutely drop some of the flex spots in the board and go a little more specific in your hate. Like Shieldred's Edict's pretty good if you're expecting a bunch of scam. Not so good if you're expecting a bunch of mono red Koldatha rebirth tokens in the leagues. Same thing with something like Flusterstorm. Really, really good if you're expecting a bunch of Cascade decks. But Chalice of the Void has that random overlap of, hey, I can bring this in against like Burn and Chalice on one and just win through Murktides and counter spells, drowns, Flusterstorm through Chalice, whatever the case may be. So just keep that in mind. Like this is very much a wide catching sideboard meant for Magic Online leagues and not a specific targeted meta. If I was going into a challenge this weekend and thought there were like two or three decks I really wanted to key in on, sideboard would look very, very different. So let's go ahead and hop into the matches through the magic of CGI. I've already got a great thumbnail made up for this one, and I'm kind of excited about it. So be prepared. And no, that is not a foreshadowing Lion King reference. All right. So game number one. Let's see if we can I gotta remember to keep my cursor over on that screen where the video is playing so that I don't accidentally click the recording software and pause it when I don't mean to be, or when I don't mean to, because I need to be able to pause the video to talk about stuff. The keep is very much on the idea that I'm on the draw, so I've got a chance for a land there, and I've got a ton of 1 mana interaction. So even if I don't hit my second land right away, I still got like the double push if I'm against a creature deck, Thoughtseize, Consider. So I feel pretty comfortable with it. We happen to hit the second land right away, so that's great. But now seeing a Valakut means I'm very, very interested in just thought seizing and then being able to like consider plus push next turn if they have uh I don't know, something I might want to push. But so we see double Steve, Scape Shift, 3 lands. I've got a ton of counter magic in my deck, so I feel like there's a reasonable chance that I'll find one before this Scape Shift goes off. But if I have the chance to make my opponent need to draw both lands and payoffs, then that's a lot better than making it to where they only have to draw like lands or only have to draw payoffs. So if I take one of the Steves and assume I'm going to draw a counter spell for the Scape Shift, then it starts becoming all right. They have to hit more land drops because they'd be sitting at 5 lands, the one in play, 3 in the hand, the Steve. That's not enough to kill me with a Valakut with Escape Shift. So now they have to draw more lands and they have to draw more payoffs if I'm just assuming that I'm going to draw a counter spell for Scape Shift. So end up taking a Steve, and then I can just like push a second Steve just to get a card in the yard for Murktide. And kind of like I said, we did find some counter spells right away, or did find a counter spell right away. They found ways to get lands, which is okay. Hey, look, more counter spells. Those are always nice. All right, so we've got options here. I know they've got a Scape Shift and a Zeator's Proving Ground in hand. Their third card is unknown. I could play conservative, play or hold up a counter spell past the turn, plan on countering Escape Shift, but they would have to have a land ramp spell Scape Shift to kill me here. And it has to be an untapped land because they can't play Zeator's Proving Ground and then like search up a tapped land, put it into play and kill me. So it has to be an untapped land or a ramp spell that gets an untapped land and Scape Shift. They could have Dryad and play a land and bolt me. That's fine because I can like untap, kill the Dryad, or just sit back with Counterspell next turn with Scape Shift, or for Scape Shift. But I'm pretty okay like taking this risk because if they don't kill me this turn, then I just get to like hit them 3 times with a Murktide Regent and I'm fine. So here they tap out for a Soul of Windgrace. If I find a fetch land, like, yeah, game's over because now I get to kill the Soul of Windgrace and hold up my counter magic. And this is kind of what I was talking about with the Scape Shift, like leaving the Scape Shift at the beginning of the game. It's recognizing that this deck is centered around counter spells. They're the backbone of my game plan, and I have to assume that I'm going to find them. And that's kind of what I was banking on. That's what happened. Like, I assumed the Scape Shift was going to be irrelevant, and turns out it was. I could have gone for the counter spell on the Scape Shift to save the Drown in the Lock in case of something like a Dryad, but I really wanted to use the Drown in case they had like a Primeval Titan, and I wouldn't be able to drown that. So that's why I used the Drown when I could instead of the counterspell. Little unfortunate they had a Dryad right then and there, but at the same time, like, hey, we draw a fetch land. We've got another Fatal Push. We're sitting here with a counterspell. Life's good. All we've got to do is wear down our opponent's top decks, which obviously drawing more counterspells helps with. And there we go. Game number 1. Typically, Scape Shift variants are a fairly good matchup for us because we do just have a whole bunch of counter spells. Now, obviously, that can fluctuate based on how many like Veil of Summers they play. If they're playing like Wrenn and 6, it's a bad card for us to deal with. So it's not a perfect formula, but post board, I didn't see any Primeval Titans, so I'm less excited about Dress Down. Push is pretty bad since Dryad's like the only target, and I still have Dismember and Drown in the Lock, plus my counter magic. Turok is better on the play than the draw. Other than that, I'm just bringing in like Flusterstorms to fight over any sort of ramp spell. Bringing in Spreading Seas to hit Valakut. And I think I brought in one Turok over Brazen Borrower. So it looks like the list that I showed at the beginning is off. This is the list with Brazen Borrower over Opt. So I'll fix that when I upload the deck list. So here we've got an answer to Dryad, got an answer to Scapeshift. Like I said, this is usually a pretty good matchup, but it's dependent on things like Veil of Summer and Renin 6. So Renin 6 does put a bit of a wrench in our plans. Here we're just going to get down a Murktide. Just want something on board. Like, it's very unfortunate that they can just bolt it if they've got some, but, or they wish for a bolt. But at the end of the day, I just need like something on the battlefield. So we got Dryads, we got Dwarven Mines, we've got Chalice of the Voids. Pretty good turn out of them. So we could like dismember the Dryad and attack. The problem is they've got this Wren emblem next turn with Lightning Bolt, Explore, Wish already in the yard. So like I'm not beating that Wren emblem. So I'm kind of okay just scooping it up there, moving on. Go into game 3. There we go. I'd say quality of life concession, but like we're not winning that one. So here we go, game number 3. Don't think there's any real changes in the sideboarding. Pretty reasonable opening hand, just a whole bunch of interaction. We just need to find a threat. Pretty much the story of our lives with anything blue black shadow related. First thought sees decide to take the terminate because again, like the Scapeshift is a non-card with counter spells and everything else I've got going on. I do not care about Scapeshift. So I can take terminate, take the wish next turn, and then just like sit back on counter magic. I'm not taking the wish here because of Renin 6. If I thought seize and they don't have anything other than wish, and then they draw Renin 6, then they can resolve that, and that's really, really bad for me. But if I wait through this turn, then I have the option to counterspell if they top deck a Renin 6, and then untap and double spell with Thoughtseize hold up counterspell next turn. So I'm only doing this because I hit the land drop. Farseek is fine. Street Wraith into more counter spells is fine. Thoughtseize again. Take Wish, and we just see like 3 lands in Scapeshift. Well, we've already decided we don't care about Scapeshift. So that's not going to suddenly change. We just need to find a threat. And we're kind of like at this point where we're firing off counter spells on anything we can counter because we just have this big abundance of counter magic. Can pretty safely Spreading Seas there because my opponent can't untap and untap and Scapeshift. But obviously them finding Ren right away is kind of frustrating. But at least I know that like out of their last 2 cards, it's just a Scapeshift, a land, unknown. So now we've gotten to Scapeshift territory. Everybody's favorite play of Dismember Your Own Shadow so that you're able to turn this into a 2-turn clock instead of a 3-turn. and play out the second shadow so that they can't chump block and survive an extra turn, and sit on counterspell. So pretty solid win there. Again, like I said, the Scapeshift decks are usually a pretty good matchup for us. Um, Shadow and Murktide are typically bigger than they can deal with. The counter magic is excellent. You just have to be careful of like Veil of Summer. So try to pick your spots if you can. Like Thoughtseize on turn 1 into open mana, probably not a great idea. But if they go for like a turn 2 Ren and you counter it, then untapping and Thoughtseizing there is really nice. Um, Even if they have like Veil and Payoff, and you only have, say, one piece of hand disruption or one counterspell or something, I would still very likely take the Veil of Summer because you're more likely to find more counter magic to kind of help deal with the second threat. All right, so this is match number 2. We're on the play. Let's talk about the mulligan choice there. Come on. One lander with a Wraith, no black mana. I might keep this on the draw, but on the play, I think there's too much stress to find a second land. And even if you do, there's no guarantee that like Drowns or Stubborn Denial are going to be live. The reason I kind of kept the one lander in game 1 of match 1 was because I had Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, Consider. So like and access to a Watery Grave. So like I had a bunch of cards I could cast more proactively. The 6-card hand, perfectly fine. Got a couple Wraiths, got some interaction. Thoughtseize and see that our opponent is on some sort of Prowess deck. Makes our Cycle Street Wraith Shock Thoughtseize start look a little sketchy. Here, I'm not fatal pushing on my turn because if my opponent plays something like a Sprite Dragon, I kind of want to interact with that. And if they don't go all in on this Soulscar Mage, then I can just do like that and kill it into turn and be fine. I do want to put a higher priority on my counter spells because of the card Underworld Breach. Uh, Breach is like the card that's going to win the game for them more often than not. So not leaving yourself dead to it is huge. The Shadow here, I'm not playing out because I know about Prismatic Ending off the Thoughtseize. So I don't want to just like throw this Shadow to its doom. So my opponent's 2 blind draws there. 3 blind draws were Swift Spear, Lightning Bolt, Lava Dart, which means they are able to attack in at my Murktide and kill it. And then, of course, immediately after top deck, the Underworld Breach, which is what I wanted to save this Drown in the Lock for, but I can't afford to just like not play a threat out as a roadblock. So unfortunate series of draws there to have to stare down, but that's why we got sideboarding. Trimming on some Street Wraiths, Thoughtseizes, bringing in. I ended up trimming on a Murktide because I just didn't want to have dead cards in hand. Brought in the extra Fatal Push, the Shieldred's Edict, the Fluster Storms, the Engineered Explosives, the Chalice of the Void, because Chalice on 1 is very, very good against them. And the Unlicensed Hearse. I'm not that excited about Unlicensed Hearse, but I just have like a bunch of stuff I want to get out of the main deck. So be it. Reasonable opener. We've got the Hearse. We've got a Path of Peril. Brought in Path of Peril too. Don't have to be overly aggressive with my life total. It's going to be nice and fetch for us. We just really hope they don't have like Sprite Dragon here, which they do not. So I am going to absolutely try to kill this channeler. Which doesn't work, but we do fuel the graveyard so we can like play out a hearse, play out a Murktide. Um I think that I wasn't playing the Murktide there because I didn't want it to just be dead to double bolt. I'm pretty positive was my thought. Like I just want to get a few more spells in the yard to be able to play out a really big Murktide like this. So now they've got to have like triple spell to kill it or something. Iteration's fine. Yeah, and if I get to untap with Drown in the Lockup and a Murktide out, I feel fairly confident. Just kind of hoping to find something I can Drown in the Lock so that I'm able to get down a bigger Murktide next turn. But I'm not about to waste a Drown in the Lock on a prismatic ending for an unlicensed hearse that I'm not that attached to anyway. But here we finally have the ability to kind of turn the corner. Like if our opponent goes in on trying to kill us with a Swift Spear, we can kill the Swift Spear. If they played out the Giganta, we can kill the Swift Spear. It does get a little awkward with this Soul Scar Mage. I think I probably should have just countered the Soul Scar Mage. But because I let that go, I kind of end up in this situation where my opponent's able to throw a bunch of spells at my Murktide, and I'm not too fond of that. Like, obviously, they got to give up a bunch of cards to not actually deal with the Murktide. And since they're doing that, I'm kind of under the assumption that they don't have a lot of gas following that up. Um, which obviously was very, very wrong. We'll yoink a Swift Spear, hold up Counterspell, or Drown in the Lock. Decided to let the Giganta resolve so that I could. Did I not? I thought I was letting that resolve so I could Drown and lock it on my turn. But I don't think it matters too terribly much. The old mid part of the game where you start top decking a bunch of lands. Yeah, so I think the real turning point of this game was letting that Soul Scar Mage resolve instead of just like drowning it so that they couldn't shrink my first Murktide. But I had Path of Peril. So I do think I punted away that game pretty hard. I think I should have just said, like, you can't race this first Murktide. Especially not without a Soul Scar Mage. Because they'd have to, like, triple spell at that Murktide. But on to game 3 against Tron, we see Tower, Power Plant, Scrying, no way to make green mana. But Scrying, I still think is the take. We don't have to care about our life total since it's Tron. Just getting out a threat is very, very relevant, since especially now I can start like thought seizing, holding up counterspell, or drown in the lock. I thought this was a pretty interesting play out of my opponent. So attacking with the Haywire Might means when it dies, they gain the 2 life, which turns the clock from 5 turns to 6 on my side. So that's actually pretty heads up out of them. I could have just taken the hit and like raced, but I really want to Thought Seize next turn. And if I have to fetch and Thought Seize, then I start running the risk of them actually being able to outrace my Murktide with that Haywire Might. I'll just take the extra turn. Thoughtseize takes a Worm Coil. So they've just got double Sylvan Scrying with no green mana and an Ugin. So as long as I'm able to interact over their green mana or over their Sylvan Scrying, then I feel okay. Especially now that I've got Counterspell and Drown in the Lock. And I'm pretty sure opponent scoops it up there. Yeah. Sideboarding against Tron. Anything that says kill a creature's coming out. So like Fatal Pushes, Dismembers. Board out some Drowns because you usually expect a lot of Relic of Progenitus from them. Boarding in the Spreading Seas, Turoks, Fluster Storms. You can board in the Shieldred's Edict, but usually I prefer to focus on countering the payoffs rather than killing them after they've resolved. What else did I bring in? 2 Turok, 2 Spreading Seas, 2 Fluster Storm, and something else. We'll see if we see it in our opening hand, and I can remember. Very interactive opener. Pass with Stub up and hope we can stub like an Ancient Stirrings. I'm actually really surprised there that our opponent would play around Ancient Stirrings. Like most Tron players won't. They just crack the sphere, immediately go for the Ancient Stirrings, and then play the Tron land afterwards. So heads up by them to play the land first, play around Stub. That being said, if I get a chance to stub something, I'm going to stub it, especially when Ancient Stirrings doesn't reveal the third Tron land. Which could mean that they have it, but also a calculated risk here. I could play Shadow and hold up Flusterstorm or consider, or I can hold up Counterspell here. And hope for Drown in the Lock being live. Like, hope my opponent plays something like a map here that I can fight over and be able to untap and maybe give myself another shot at a land drop. So we see they have a second tower. So I'm taking the turn. Hope they don't rip something off the top that punishes me. Yeah. See how that works out. But we do have Counterspell, Drown in the Lock, and a very quick clock. And a Spreading Seas. Spreading Seas is a fun card. So they'd have to top deck another mine here, which they do not. So we find Thoughtseize, gets Shadow up to an 11/11, and attack for lethal. If we had not found the Spreading Seas, we could have held up Counterspell. So we're still in like pretty good shape. All right, this is round number 4, I believe. Very similar to round 2, or similar to round 1, where we've got a 1-lander, but we've got like Consider, Push, Dismember, we've got a Shadow, we've got Wraith. So like this is a great 1-lander. This has got a little bit of everything. Amulet Titan. I remember this game because this was as soon as Kevin came into the chat and was complaining about playing Abzan Shadow or Abzan with Death Shadows, and he couldn't get his shadows online. He kept getting stuck at like 13 life. So we just have the normal, boring turn 1 quad Wraith into a Death Shadow. You know, like, Kevin, what are you even doing? Like, obviously, it's so easy to get Death Shadow online. Are you even trying? So, that was pretty fun. Now we get to, like, hit with a Shadow and fetch and shock and blah, 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 blah. I think we just end up, like, hitting with a Shadow, playing another Shadow, holding up Stubborn Denial. Since our opponent didn't do anything on turn 2, and they're looking for the opportunity to get another Amulet in play off this Urza Saga, I'm assuming that this isn't Titan. This is probably like the Lotus Field, Timeless Lotus Amulet version. So I think consider to answer a, or not consider, Stubborn Denial to answer a Timeless Lotus, or Dismember to answer a Golos. Should be pretty good for us. There's Karn the Great Creator. I thought about letting this resolve just to like see what they could get off of it to maybe inform things a little bit more going forward, but ultimately decided like just counter the Karn. Don't be stupid. So we can dismember our own shadow. If you're curious about the math on this, we if we had two, what was it? We're at 7. We had 2/6/6 shadows. They're at 14, so we got 12 power. If you dismember your own shadow, you grow them both by 4 and then shrink one of them by 5. So you gain 8 power, then lose 5. So you're netting 3, which is enough to get us from 12 to 15 and present lethal. So good job there. Little turn 3 kill with Dimir Shadow. Yeah, love to see it. Sideboarding against this Timeless Lotus deck. Just bringing out a bunch of removal spells that like don't hit Golos. They're less concerned about a value game post board and more concerned about just like doing big stuff. So we just got to keep something that like deals with big non-creature payoffs like Timeless Lotus or Escape the Wilds. This hand, I figure if we hit the land drop, we're safe. We're on the draw, double Wraith. I kind of have to like, I don't want to keep it, but we're up a game, and if it doesn't work out, we get to go to game 3. So it's not like the end of the world if it doesn't pay off. But it does have shadows. It's got considers. So like once we found the first land, we knew we'd be able to find the second one pretty well. Speak of the devil. I could play out double shadow here, decide to play a single shadow and pass, because if my opponent floats a mana, goes and gets another amulet and plays a bounce land, they make 5, which gives them Timeless Lotus mana, and they can't pay for Stubborn Denial. Now, obviously, if they have a Lotus Field, they can pay for stub. If they have a Golos, I can't stub it, but I got to play to like whatever kind of out I do have access to. So we get the bounce land. We're feeling pretty good. Don't be Golos. Don't be Golos. Don't be Golos. Well, that's technically not a Golos. I'm sure some of you at home are already seeing where this is going. Grazer net 4, Grazer net 4, or net 3. Grazer again. Yeek. This is me slowly counting my opponent's mana. They're up to 13, 14. Well, that's not Emrakul mana, so that's cool. Now it is. So yeah, if we had had like one more loss of life, we could have stubbed the Timeless Lotus and maybe stopped this, but we didn't, and we cannot beat Emrakul, getting hard cast there. So on to game 3. Just looking for a hand like this with some cheap interaction. They don't really care about the constructs off Urza Saga much, but Dress Down still like kind of relevant. Stops Golo's trigger, stops Arboreal Grazer trigger, if that's what you care about. And I really like finding the Hercule's Recall here because that does enable us to interact when they've got multiple amulets on field. So Thoughtseize, see Expedition map, Storm the Festival. We're definitely taking the map. Storm the Festival is a ways off, especially since they don't currently have an amulet. Now they'll have an amulet. Or at least an amulet in a few turns. We'll worry about it then. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and cycle this dress down. I just need to find like stuff. They're not making constructs. All right. So the universe has said I need a dress down. And sometimes you just have to like accept that the universe knows best. What I'm really hoping for here is an opportunity where my opponent like tutors up an amulet, copies the amulet with Mycosynth Garden, and then plays a bounce land. I get to stub something, or I get to dress down a Golos or whatever, and then Hercule's Recall. And that just kind of like reset their side of the board while I've got a shadow out. And I'm thinking to myself the entire time this is going on, the only way this like really punishes me is if they have like a Lotus Field and a Golos. And those would have to be like their exact 2 blind draws, because they would be able to resolve the Golos, and I could dress down the Golos trigger. But if I didn't have the dress down, like if I had cycled the dress down earlier and they had Golos and Lotus Field here, then that would get me. But I'm trying to say, like, the universe wanted me to have the dress down, so I've kind of got that covered, even though that would be the worst case scenario in a crazy set of blind draws. But they did top deck the Lotus Field, so it was a fairly crazy set of blind draws. Luckily, it's just Storm the Festival into the stub. So, yeah, if you ever think there's like a Magic Online conspiracy going on, look at games like this where you say, hey, if I had not hit a dress down, then my opponent could have just Lotus Field Golos as their 2 blind draws and absolutely wrecked me, because we knew they drew the Urza Saga turn 1. So exactly, Lotus Field Golos like would have completely gotten me. I could have Hercule's recalled, but they would have had Golos go get a land, replay an amulet, replay a Mycosynth Garden, and could have been able to rebuild pretty quickly. And the fact that they hit the Lotus Field is kind of insane. Like, they hit one of the 2 things that got them out of this predicament. And it's just like absolutely crazy to think about how often that seems to happen. So of course we Thoughtseize, and they had the Golos. Their 2 blind rips were Lotus Field and Golos. Exactly. Which, if we hadn't have hit the other dress down, would have gotten us. So the universe wanted us to have a dress down to combat the Magic Online menace. Or you could say like we were the Magic Online menace and we drew a second dress down. But I wanted to Hercule's Recall first to put the amulet back into their hand so I could take the amulet with Thoughtseize. And it just so happened that I got to see that Golos there. But now we know we've got dress down next turn to kill with Shadow, and hopefully nothing happens. They top decked another amulet. Magic Online, Thoughtseize bug. Like, I know that they are unalive here, but it is hilarious to think about those 4 blind draws being Urza's Saga on turn 1 to get the amulet, Lotus Field and Golos on turn 2 and 3 to give them the mana and the ability to beat Stubborn Denial, I've got to dress down to find action. So I could have been out of dress down for the Golos. And then turn 4, immediately top decking another amulet to rebuild right after I took an amulet the turn before with the Thoughtseize. So I don't know. It's wild to think about things playing out that way. Like, if we didn't have the stone cold nuts, like, we were dead and just nothing we could do about it. All right, so up against what I'm assuming is blue red Murktide, based off of Steam Vents turn 1 and no revealed copy of Giganta. Yep. So we see Bolt Channeler. Unfortunately, them having the second copy of Ragavan with us only having one piece of interaction is a little rough. But hopefully if we get them like using, my god, third copy of Ragavan. I was gonna say hopefully if we can get them like using up some of these spells, we might be okay. So we get to kill the Channeler, hopefully counterspell this Ragavan, and we're kind of back to square one. They've still got a lightning bolt. We're still hoping to find a threat. Another counterspell's fine. I do appreciate that they keep wanting to cast spells during their own draw step. That's super cool of them. Then here, I could dress down like end of their turn, into my turn, just to try to shut off these channelers, but I don't think it's like a big deal. All right, Murktide is amazing. Like, easily one of the best draws I could have right there. Especially since I get to just Murktide and like hold up counterspell. They do go for the EOT fetch. So I'm just going to dress down to shut off these channelers so they can't get any sort of scry going on or surveil going on. They can't get these up to 3/3s, so I'm not dead to double bolt. And if they pass the turn, then I know I'm getting into this territory of like forcing chump blocks. And opponent decides to scoop it up there. I guess they did not have the bolts or the ability to kill me from there. Sideboarding against Murktide, just trimming on like Street Wraiths, drowning the locks because of Murktide itself. Trim a Thoughtseize. Sometimes I trim a Murktide on the draw if I'm expecting like unlicensed hearse, or I don't think I'm going to be able to get that Murktide big enough to survive Unholy Heat. But it's kind of how I'm feeling day to day. Boarding in unlicensed hearse, EE, Turox, the other Fatal Push, the Shieldred's Edict, Luster Storms. Kind of a sketchy 7 here. I think I'm really just keeping this hand because it answers like any early threat very, very well. All right. So we've got dudes. We just need somebody to blink first. And by somebody, I mean our opponent. Finding land there is really nice. All right. Somebody's blinking. I do want to be like a little careful of Blood Moon, which is why I'm being kind of passive with my fetches. That being said, I think I got pretty punished here for not at least fetching up one Watery Grave into turn. Now I'm going for this kick Turok to try to uh, get them down pretty low. Yeah, and they just have like everything I don't want to see there. The Murktide, the dashed Ragavan. I can edict away the Murktide, but I'm still at the mercy of like Ragavan or them just top decking a Bolt or something. All right. This attack. This attack was probably a mistake. Like I know they block with the Ragavan, so I assume that means they have another Ragavan. And I've got Drown in the Lock, but I think I could have played a little more passively there and just gotten my Murktide and like held up interaction. Yeah, now they just have double heat, dash Ragavan. So I definitely think I played that a little too aggressively and could have saved a little life. But so be it. You live, you learn. On to game 3, opening hand, fatal push, couple lands, counter spells. It's about all I can ask for. Considers a very good pickup. Opponent fetching out a basic island right away makes me assume they've got a Blood Moon in hand, and then flipping over Spyro Leyline of the Void. It's quite the achievement. Take lands. Lands are good. So now if they go for something important, we can like counterspell plus Flusterstorm. Get on the board first. Just give our opponent something that they've got to care about eventually. Also helps fuel our yard a bit for our Murktide. Ragavan is fine. So it feels like they're pretty weary of our Murktides. We're pretty weary of their Murktides. Also, again, feels like they've got a Blood Moon in hand and they're just trying to like find a window to resolve it. And then this is kind of what I was talking about with this 4 Murktide situation is I feel like I'm drawing a bunch of them very, very often. And I don't want to see them that often. All right, so nothing out of them is extremely nice. They could have like counterspell for my Murktide here. Obviously, I'll counterspell back and try to protect it. Mana leak. Whew. And the fact that Murktide's big enough to dodge an unholy heat is very, very nice. So as soon as they pass the turn here, like I felt okay, and then they Otawara, so that kind of went out the door. Just go ahead and dress down to see some more cards. Like if they've got a Murktide and they're choosing not to play it, then power to them. But I can't afford to just like sit around and not do anything. Chandler's fine. Unholy Heat, a little bit less so. All right. So now that we've protected Murktide for a turn and we still have Counterspell, we get to this funny situation where Chandler has to attack. And I've got a Murktide that outgrows it. So all I've really got to do is like protect my Murktide for the turn. EE lets me take out these tokens so I don't have to take any extra damage. So if I fetch off Misty Rainforest or take a ping off Fiery Islet, I'm not going down to 3, which obviously is Bolt territory. So really, really good setup for us to be able to just like eat this Channeler, kill the tokens. We know they have no cards in hand, so we get to counterspell the Spyro. And then, like I said, get the full board wipe here. We're still safe from Lightning Bolt. And we get to untap and just like play another Murktide, grow the first one, and hopefully have them dead in the air next turn. We would have to go down to 2 if we need to dismember. But if our opponent does something like play their own 8/8 Murktide here, then we can pay double black and 1 for the first dismember and then pay 4 life for the second dismember and go down to 1 and actually kill that Murktide. But instead, looks like they've got tokens. Stubborn Denial being an excellent, excellent pickup. Now we can go down to 3 off the tokens. And as long as our opponent doesn't have exactly Murktide off the top, we should be okay. And obviously, if they put like an expressive iteration on the stack or something, we are countering that with every bit of gusto we can. All right, so this is the list again. If you missed it at the front of the video, the only difference is the list I ran through that league had Brazen Borrower over the Opt. So I've got to swap that out, and I'll have it correct for the Stream Decker update. So should link to the correct list. Otherwise, yeah, like the 4th Murktide's probably the biggest piece of contention. As you saw in that league, we did see multiple Murktide quite a few times. But there were also times where we were like desperate to find a threat and really thankful that we did find a Murktide eventually. So again, I'm kind of in the camp of I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I'm more likely to keep the 4 Murktide in than cut the 4th one and run into too many games where I just don't see a threat at all. That being said, if I am cutting the 4th Murktide, it's probably going to be for like another like 2 Opt or something. Cut Murktide, Brazen Borrower for 2 Opt just to increase the consistency of having those early cantrips because they are very, very nice at smoothing out your early turn draws. But yeah, nice little 4-1. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. Like I said, we'll have more videos coming out in the next week showcasing like Jund with Invasion of Ikoria, Golgari, Rakdos. I think I've got like a Sultai non-invasion league, but we'll kind of see what comes up when. Just got to make thumbnails. So yeah, hope y'all have an awesome rest of your days. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back live later. Link to the Twitch channel down below, as well as the deck list here. Invite to the Discord if you want to come over there, talk all things Shadow. And yeah, that's about it. Adios for now.